This is the Orangeville Public Library Board meeting of Wednesday, June 24th, 2020. I'm just going to let everybody know that who's in attendance here. So it's myself, Bill Ray, who's chair, Lisa Post, councillor and vice chair, Councillor Grant Peters, Ben McDonald, Patrick Neely, and Shelley Brigant and Sherry Marks are all present, and they're all board members. Also are a number of members of staff for the town of Orangeville, including Darla Fraser, the CEO of the library, Kim Carson, Dan Bonato. Thank you very much for hosting this again, Dan. We appreciate that. Deb Vitanen, who's taking minutes, and we think Ray Osmond might be joining us at some point as well, who's the general manager of community services. So with the meeting called to order, any conflicts of interest? Seeing none, can I get a approval of the agenda, please? Moved by Patrick, seconded by Grant. All those in favor? Okay. And if we can get the adoption of the previous library board minutes dated June the 24th. Is there any comments or corrections to those minutes? Okay, so then if I could get a motion to accept the minutes from Patrick, seconded by Lisa. All those in favor? Passed. Okay. Presentation to the board, there's none. And then there's a number of information items, and then we'll get to the item at hand here. So just for the record, the information items, just to list them out, Town of Orangeville Parks and Rec Master Plan, handout from the consultant, questions submitted to the board, connection to the community. These are pieces that Darla, I think, developed for the handout. Connection to the town, historic charm and dynamic future, library recreation and the community hub, the board's role in governance and advocacy, and then library mission statement. So those items are all part of your package that went out for this meeting. Can I get a motion just to receive the items at this point?
I'll motion.
Ben, seconded by Sherry. All those in favor? Okay. So now really to the topic at hand. And if I could just for a minute, just provide a couple of comments and then we'll kick it off for board discussion. So first of all, I just want to say the events of a week ago when the story first broke that the Mill Street location of the library was quote unquote closing, it really does show the power of social media and how false information can spread so quickly. The significant community response, including 58 emails to council that I understand were part of the agenda at one point, and this just to the media has prompted this special meeting of this board to determine and articulate what our position is on the Mill Street Library. So a couple of facts, first of all, I just want to emphasize. First, at no time did this board make any decisions with respect to the closing of the Mill Street Library. Secondly, at no time did council for the town of Orangeville make any decisions with respect to the closing of the Mill Street branch of the public library. So the future of the Mill Street Library was discussed in an external report that was provided to council with respect to its long-term plan for parks and recreational programs. The report was provided to council on or around Thursday, July the 9th, and was to be discussed in the meeting on July the 13th, but has been deferred to a future meeting. So the idea that we are closing the Mill Street Library is just not something that's been up for discussion so far, let alone yet been approved by any board or any council. So something that has been up for discussion has been a significant revamping or expansion of the Alder Street Recreational Center. This board will recall that about a year ago, the town applied for a federal grant for a substantial expansion of the services at Alder that included a reconfiguration of the building entrances and parking lot, a pool expansion, additional ice pads, and an expanded library on the main floor. So the Alder Rec proposal was seen as an opportune time to improve the library services in relation to the community's size, evolving role in the libraries in the community, and the developing of social programming. The proposal for the Alder Rec Center includes a 14,000 to 16,000 library on the main level. It provides an opportunity for physical space to expand library services in a manner that, quite frankly, we just can't do given the premises that we currently have at Mill Street. So there are other things that we could incorporate, such as makerspace, music studios, program rooms, expanded children's areas, and other things that more modern library services in other communities have today. So a year ago, this board chose to write a letter of support to the town that became part of its application for the federal grant. The indication of this support was in no way an abandonment of the ideas of the importance of the library in downtown Orangeville, where it plays a critical role in the downtown core. The Mill Street Library is not just a place to get books, it's a community, social, and cultural hub that's vital to the downtown core of any vibrant community. So there may be some legitimate concerns that the closure of the Mill Street may be a potential side effect of the grant, but I don't necessarily think this has to be the case. And from what we've seen from the reactions to the town of Orangeville on Facebook, I think we can all agree that the Mill Street closing, or the idea of it closing, is unacceptable. So what are we here to discuss now? So the master plan, as I understand it, and I'll turn to Grant and Lisa to maybe to get further explanation, but my understanding is that it's a very high-level guiding document meant to guide the town for making decisions for Parks and Rec for the next 10 years. So it has to anticipate both current needs as well as broader trends and services of what we might provide in the future. So this is our opportunity as a board to state what our long-term vision for library services could be for the town. I personally believe that a library presence in the downtown core is essential for the community's well-being. But I also believe that Alder can represent a great opportunity to expand the library for the future in terms of the services that we can grow. So at this point, I've said quite enough, and I'm interested in what the board has to think and start the discussion from here. So who would like to go? Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I guess I'll just touch on your comment regarding the master plan and the intent of that document. So you are correct, it is a high-level document. It talks about opportunities, it talks about sequencing and planning at a master level that could result in, a certain circumstance or layout for the town in a variety of services and facilities and opportunities. So nothing in there has been decided upon, as you said. And the reason this got brought up, though, is because an endorsement of that plan in its entirety, should that happen by council, would mean that staff have the direction to move forward on some of these initiatives. And where there is some wiggle room, or there are some recommendations that would steer certain facilities or programs in a certain direction, we want to make sure we're not sort of blindly endorsing those until we've had the appropriate amount of community input. And obviously the most prevalent of those issues to come up was the library. So I agree with your summary. I just wanted to clarify that that plan does not mean certain actions will be taken. There will be other opportunities to discuss how these programs may or may not change over time. But it is important, I think, for the board to take a position on the library locations at large and the importance of the Mill Street branch.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
I have a question, Bill.
Yeah.
Thanks. When was this consultant, excuse me, the consultancy or whatever you call it, when was it asked for? In other words, was it tendered out? Like, was it 2 years ago, a year ago? Anybody know?
I'm going to defer to Grant, who's got his hand up to answer that one. I'm not sure. Grant?
Yeah, through you to Pat. The consultant got brought on, this is going to be rough timelines, about a year ago through an RFP process, through a tender basically, where the proposal stated what that scope included, and it looks at all recreation and parks facilities and programs throughout the town. So they're a third-party consulting firm that specializes in master planning and landscape and recreation. And their process included some community consultation and surveys, and of course their expertise on topics such as the trends in libraries and recreation facilities at a municipal level. And so this is the conclusion of their work, at which point it gets turned over for endorsement by council and implementation by staff. And that part of the agenda was removed from our previous council meeting to allow for more time for the public's comments, and that meeting is now coming up this coming Monday.
Okay, so you're saying it was last summer, kind of, or in September?
Plus or minus, about a year ago, they would have gone through the tendering process. Several firms would have bid on the work. It was awarded by staff, and then it's been in development over the last year or so.
Okay, and you just got it back, am I correct in assuming in July, right? Or
Yeah.
earlier? So
About
it's July.
Yeah, about a week before the meeting
When I-
that we had on the 13th or whatever it was. So.
All right, okay. All right, that's all I got to worry about.
Okay, anybody else? Any comments or questions? Lisa?
I think just to piggyback off of what Grant said and Bill, what you said, I think that you covered some really important points there. I think the one other point that was missing perhaps is that even with an endorsement from council, there are still a number of steps. So I just don't want people to be concerned that an endorsement of council means that all of these actions are moving forward. But I think Grant is absolutely correct. I think this board needs to come to council with a vision of what we want to see moving forward for the library services in our community. There are several steps that would happen before implementation of any of these recommendations would happen. This is a master guiding document for staff, which they would then incorporate into their budget planning process. So any of these things could be included or removed from any budget moving forward, even though they're saying that this one item they want to happen in 2022, we could remove it from that budget and push it to 2023 or anything like that. So there are a number of things that would still happen even after discussion at this coming Monday's meeting. But I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of the board of if they had a chance to read the document, what their thoughts were about some of the ideas. I thought there were some interesting ideas brought forward that could be a great addition into our library and to our existing space, such as some of the arts and culture discussion that they had. Using some of the levels of the library for that would be a great idea going forward into the future of our community, of course, while maintaining library presence in that building. So,
yeah, that's great. Anybody else? Thank you.
Were you looking for something today you want, or can we have the summer to sit on it?
I think we're looking to be able to articulate some kind of position today as to what this board thinks the direction of the library should be heading. And having said that, I as Lisa said, the document, it covers a wide range of things, and if council was to endorse well, I guess that's a question I'll have for Lisa or Grant. For council to endorse the recreational plan, I mean, it's a general, it's a blueprint for the future. It's not necessarily, but there's a number of components there that I would imagine, as you said, Lisa, have to be business cased and budgeted for, and the whatnot before the whole thing moves forward.
absolutely. And if I may, Bill, I think that the one thing, Patrick, from this board that we need today is it would be nice for Grant and I to have the board's position with us when we go into the council meeting on Monday, or at least a guideline of what we discussed. And I don't think it needs to be super formal at this point. Grant, what do you think? I'm not sure, but
I agree. I think, we have had a lot of public input on this particular issue. We'll probably get more on Monday on other aspects within the plan, but in terms of whether or not the board, felt strongly about keeping two locations or consolidating or, having a downtown presence, again, it doesn't have to be in ultra detail because those are still to be ironed out. But to build on what Lisa said, I think what we want to do is save staff from going down the wrong path. If, there wasn't any uproar about the library and the board didn't take a position on it and the plan was endorsed, staff would move ahead in some amount of time in perhaps the consolidation of the library services at Alder. And so we need some of these things to build a position so that it's not sort of carte blanche to move ahead with something before we have all the feedback we need.
And even if we were to provide that long-term vision in this meeting, realistically, given the scope of the plan and the number of things that it touches, I would imagine that even with the Alder Rec Center, I mean, we don't even know what the result of the federal grant is at this point. So the funding, is an issue. So it could be still several years before you would even break ground, I would suppose.
Yeah.
Realistic?
definitely realistic. We haven't heard anything, to my knowledge, to this date anyways, about that federal grant. And I'm not sure from a staff perspective, that would be interesting once Mr. Osmond is on board, to find out if the plan would be, even without this grant, if we weren't awarded the grant, if their plan stays the same, or if some of that changes, because this is a huge project that was hinging a lot on that grant. So it would be interesting to hear what staff's perspective is on that piece.
Yeah,
So,
I think Park was ahead of the horse slightly there in that, you know, the grant window only existed for so long, and ideally those ideas wouldn't be formulated and put together into that grant package until they had gone through the approval process and the public consultation. But because that deadline hit before this study had finished, they kind of had to jump the gun a little bit and get it on paper. So that's why it doesn't seem as flushed out perhaps in the eyes of the public as it should be.
okay. Ray, I see that you've joined us. Do you have any input on this particular aspect?
Thank you very much, Bill. Well, first off, let me say that your comments from everybody is quite clear and certainly the way it should be. The fact is that there's a few things that I want to put in perspective. The master plan itself is absolutely it's a very overarching document that kind of touches on a whole bunch of things, everything from culture to recreation to parks to facilities to maintenance criteria and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things going on in that report. In no way, shape, or form would a council endorse when a council endorses or receives or accepts or approves the master plan document. It just basically accepts and approves that document so that it can give it to staff for staff to bring it back in whatever pieces got to come back. So in the case of the library, we would definitely have to come back and do a lot of consultation on the library. We would need use a business strategy, for want of a better word. Could be a bunch of different things we could do with it. But what's the business model for the library going forward? One of the big things I want to say about the library that, quite frankly, when we got our first surveys back, we got a little over 2,000 in total, 1,000 from the telephone survey and 1,000 whatever from the online. It's quite interesting because we set out to look at recreation in the community, and we expected to hear things about, aquatics, recreation programs, all ages, parents, and so on and so forth. And in the top 3 shows up library. In the top 3, in terms of what people are looking for and want in the community, is libraries. Now, to me, it's not a total surprise, because when you look at the trends in this country, and certainly these days in North America, a lot of people are going to libraries for all sorts of good reasons. One of the big things that's running through the master plan is a real thread about having non-sport activities. And that's really important for people like me in the staff position, because non-sport means we could get to offer a whole smorgasbord, if you would, of activity. And one of the big things about the report it identifies is the huge synergies that can happen and go ahead with when recreation combines with libraries and other pieces in the community. You have a lot of success. And one of the big things about this report is it says, hey guys, you're not quite ready to take on all these things that the community is asking for. Here are some things you look at in terms of options, the way you could go. And when I'm sitting before a library board, whether it's in this meeting or 10 or 12 more meetings, to get the input on what the new library picture looks like, and I'm taking a library in a global sense. It's not a library that we're traditionally used to. We're used to a particular facility, yes, but the new future library, what does that look like? And one of the big things that comes out of the report is that our square footage right now is not satisfying the need. And this is why when we looked at the ICIP grant, that we thought we'd expand the library at Alder and give us a footprint at the main entrance to really capitalize on this cross-programming value, which is similar to what the master plan is saying. But then once we address that, we still have a huge piece of infrastructure that you call a library on Mill Street that has to be looked at, and how does that fit into the overall library recreation plan? And that's where it comes from. And I don't have all those answers, nor do the consultant. They wouldn't give you all the answers, saying, well, okay, now you need to go out and look at what are the options, what does that look like, what's your vision for libraries, what's your vision for the different things you can do in the infrastructure. So I like your comments. I think it's very fair comments. The master plan don't have all the answers in the world, but it gives you the stages by which you need to do things. And you're absolutely correct. If we don't get the ICIP funding, a year from now, we're looking at Alder again. We're looking at probably a different venue. And again, when you look at where we're to right now in this COVID days, what happens post-COVID? is not what we were dealing with pre-COVID. You know, so it's going to be an interesting dynamic as we go forward. But one of the big things I can tell you is, and you should be very proud of, and Daryl's here, so I can say it. Daryl's done some great work, but the library is on the front piece of our operation now in terms of delivering a service. It's one of the only services we're actually delivering in libraries. And our books are up to our hits on yesterday was up to 75 people on the curbside pickup. It's huge. In actual fact, when you look at some of the things in the trends in the market in libraries, you're seeing a lot more where people are actually driving through to get books and so on. And there's less touch points, if you would. So given that we're in pandemic, it makes a lot of sense. So I'm quite excited about the master plan. Obviously, it's been you're right, Grant. We've been at it for a year. It takes a year to go through this whole process. A lot of consultation with community groups and so on and so forth, with the public and so on. And the unfortunate thing was that we would have done, but we're in COVID. We were supposed to have one more meeting with the public to present the actual document in an open house. We didn't get to do that. So we got it back to council, and yes, we would put it on the table to council. We get it accepted in whatever form it's in, and then we would go back and we would bring the pieces back in terms of budget, what needs to happen with certain boards, whatever the case would be. So it is a good position we're in. I think Bill is asking a good question. What does the board want to do? And I think there should be some direction going back so that Grant and Lisa can have something to say at the table in terms of where the library is. But I agree 100%. There's nothing in the master plan that says you should close a particular space. And it gives you a broad overview of the future for libraries is really bright. You're in the top 3 in terms of what the public and the community are looking for. And it's no surprise because it's low cost, no cost. And it gives you a lot more variety that you can have synergy with and cross program with in the rest of recreation. So I didn't mean to go on, but it's quite important that just to put it in perspective for us. Thank you.
So Ray, though, while we've got you, if I could ask a question about the process to get to the master plan that was developed. I think you referred to a bunch consultative processes and surveys that were done. Did they interview senior staff? And I'm wondering, why the consultants wouldn't take the opportunity to maybe interview this board as well as part of that process?
That's good. There was a lot of consultation with all the councillors were interviewed, council and mayor were interviewed, senior staff were interviewed, a lot of community groups, sport groups, and so on were into open house or into stakeholder sessions and those kinds of things.
Right.
And to be quite honest with you, I don't think we've met any particular boards individually. It was just come to the stakeholder and have your session. There's all sorts of different groups at different sessions. In the case of the libraries, the library wasn't an item that was actually listed in our request for master plans, in the request for the master plan RFP. In actual fact, it came out of the survey, and we said to the consultant, "You need to take a close look at this because that number is really quite an high number. What does that really mean?" So he did a little bit more research and put that in its proper context. So this is why you see the library they were looking at the library, plus they were also looking at the Alder and what the new design was for Alder. So that's how it came to be, and then obviously now we have the plan in front of us that the next stage for us would be, okay, we have the plan. There's a piece that we need to work on, and that's the libraries. And I don't know if it's Grant or Lisa mentioned it, but we would do a next phase, and we would actually look at doing a business strategy or a visioning exercise or what have you to determine where the libraries fits in terms of this new look, if you would, in terms of design at Alder or what you're going to do with Mill Street or what have you.
Okay. Any other questions of Ray Osmond while we've got him? Okay, any other questions or comments from board members at this point? Any opinions? Okay, so in the package, what we suggested was 4 bullet points in terms of the long-term vision as a starting point for discussion. So this is, these aren't set in stone either. These were put in the package, as I said, as a starting point just to have the discussion going. But in that long-term vision that was expressed in the meeting package was 4 items. First is that the board is committed to a long-term vision that continues to include a presence in the Orangeville Public Library at Mill Street location in downtown Orangeville. The second is the board continues to be committed to a long-term vision that may involve an expanded Orangeville Public Library at the Elder Recreational Center, depending on acquiring capital funding. The third is the board is of the view that both A and B, so the first two objectives I just read, are realistic and consistent with the view of servicing residents both now and in the future over the next 10 years. Indeed, that whatever the process is that goes here, that we would welcome input from patrons and residents and look forward to providing further counsel or input to council for its consideration. So I just open it up to see if those four long-term vision statements are, seem acceptable, or if anybody has any comments or additions or.
Bill, I have one comment. Sorry, I was trying to catch you
Yep.
with text and my mute button. How does the requirement for the elevator and all the costs that we don't know factor into this whole plan A, plan B? Because depending on what we need to do there, that could have some serious implications on which way we go.
Excellent question. I don't know the answer to that, Sherry, quite frankly, because you're right. For anybody else that's watching, the elevator at Mill Street is an issue. And in order to be able to bring it up to current requirements, it would be a substantial investment. And, numbers have been floated around, and I don't necessarily want to, because I don't think we've had any firm estimates, but you're right, it would be a very substantial cost for the library or the town moving forward. So now, I don't know at this point, but that's certainly a factor.
So, and I may have missed something at some point in documents leading up to the elevator, and I don't want to talk all the zeros. But is there the reason for the elevator refurbish overhaul? Is it just the safety and redesign of the elevator, or is it that we need to move bodies between floors? And maybe we can table something for in the fall that we look at the elevator itself going, if it's that the washrooms are in the basement, maybe we bring them up to the main floor if we're going to take the main library to Alder, and this becomes more of a satellite as an option, that maybe we can redesign what we actually need at Mill Street, keep them both, but we don't need as much of the floor space, and maybe we don't then have to go down the road of altering the elevator. And I don't have all the answers to the pieces of the finer points, but it's something to keep an open mind about as well. Yeah. When we're looking at all of the options.
Lisa, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so just to touch on Sherry's point for a moment, and maybe Ray can help me make sure that I'm clarifying this properly, but my understanding of the elevator at the library specifically is that all municipal buildings need to be up to AODA standards by 2023, 24, somewhere around there. And one of the pieces of that is to make sure that the elevator meets those requirements of being AODA compliant, so accessibility compliant. And because as long as it stays a municipally owned facility, it will need to have those standards implemented by that date, according to the provincial government. So I think that the elevator, regardless of how we move forward, I think that the elevator is going to remain a factor that's going to need to be discussed at any point if we want to keep this as a library, which I think, judging from the conversation that we've had, that's our desire as a board, is to make sure that this at least stays partially a library. It will continue to be a municipally owned building, and that elevator will still need to be addressed.
And just to take that one step further, Lisa, I don't think it's just an issue of where the washrooms are located. It's a matter that if you're going to provide public access to
Exactly.
2, 3, 4 floors, you have to provide that same equal access to anybody that may have accessibility issues.
Exactly. The entire building needs to be up to accessibility standards, regardless of where the washroom placement is. That's not going to be a factor in it at all. It's that the elevator, the lift in its current state is not the elevator requirement that it needs to be in order to meet AODA standards.
Any other comments or questions? Any comments on the back to the 4 statements that were provided as draft?
I can keep talking if somebody else wants
Sure.
to. So I think that the way that you've laid out the long-term vision in the agenda makes great sense. I think that the appetite from the board and the community members that I've spoken to is keep a presence of the Orangeville Library downtown. It may not look exactly the same as it does right now, but I think the desire from the community and from the board is to keep at least a presence downtown. I think that all of the board that I've spoken to and the community that I've spoken to loves the idea of Alder still being expanded if we can get that grant and get the capital funding. I think that does nothing but benefit the community. And I think that the way that you've got it laid out is a very appropriate way that Grant and I could bring that to council on Monday as part of the discussion. I think that it's important for town staff to recognize that this is the desire of the board and of the community, and that the input that we've gotten from the community so far has really led to this. So that would be my comment. I'm comfortable with the way it's written. I don't think there's anything else that needs to be added to that. I think that that's a really good statement for us to be able to bring to council on Monday. What do you think, Grant?
Grant, if I could put you on the spot too.
No, of course. I agree. I mean, we're not in a position to say this is exactly what facility A or facility B should look like. But it's important to know that the board has a vision to keep a downtown presence, and based on discussion so far, it seems that's the case. And the way you've laid it out keeps it open for interpretation, but lays down the framework for how the library and the downtown should exist in the future. So I like the way it's been presented.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about the vision statements? All right, unless there's any further discussion, then I'm going to ask for somebody to move a motion to accept those 4 vision statements as the long-term vision of this board. Moved by Lisa, seconded by
I can.
Ben. Any further discussion, questions, comments? Okay.
The only other one thing that I would ask Bill, if we could, is that perhaps in September, whenever we can reconvene as a board, whether it be September, October's meeting, perhaps we can get a little bit more in depth into our community presence vision that we have, and maybe a little bit more into the bones of what we do. I think that this covers the general broad, but I would love to see a long-term vision planning from the library board about the programming and ideas going forward as well. I think that's going to be really important in the future, but I think this is a really great starting point.
Yeah, agreed, Lisa. And the other thing that I would like to be able to do is know how, and maybe I'll turn to Ray for this, is how you plan on doing the community input on the broader master plan, and how we can leverage that process to be able to get community input on the library aspects of that plan.
Thank you, Bill. It's quite interesting, actually. I think Grant might have alluded to it. There's a lot of pieces in the plan we didn't deal with. As an example, we have Tony Rose on the table. We have the Arts and Culture Center piece that's still on the table. We have the library on the table. So there's lots of different things in terms of facilities. There's also facilities, outside facilities, that we have on the table. So it's good. It's a good question about how we go from here. One of the things, of course, that's coming up is we have a budget coming up. And in the budget process, from a staff perspective, we would have to bring things forward that are timely based on a review of the master plan that makes some sense. As an example, if one of the things you just alluded to is your vision and your future piece, and in October, you'll be putting together your budget as well. Or you finished by then, I guess, but at the end of the day, you might want to consider if there's something you can do as a board to look at library per se and say, okay, where does the library fit? So when we come to you and say we're going to do a business strategy on, let's say, Tony Rose as an example, well, as you know, Tony Rose in the readings or in the master plan on Tony Rose, it was also alluded to you might want to consider library, you might kind of want to consider a black box theater. There's a whole bunch of things in there. So every time we open up something, we'll look at everything around it. So there'll be a bunch of trigger points, if you would, in the master plan to take a look at a whole bunch of different things. I think it's a really good point that Lisa makes, that you might want to consider as a board to really get your head around where a library fits, and then all these things that come at you, you're prepared with a plan to say, here's our plan. It doesn't fit with our plan, so this won't work here, but it will work there. So I think it'd be good for you guys to take a look at your future in terms of what you see as a library operating in the future, and then how does the pieces going on in the community impact that, or you could affect it. Just to add to it, though, if we if we don't get the funding for Alder, we definitely will be looking at a different strategy for Alder. So again, we'll be coming back looking at, well, do we now do the library piece at Alder and make that a priority? If council says, yeah, that's going to be a priority, let's do that first and then do the pool piece or what have you, then these are the kinds of things that always continuously coming back to the table. So it really, I think if you take it and look at it yourselves and say, okay, what is the library that you see in the future going to look like? And I think you need to go through that exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, and inevitably, I think we're going to want some kind of a process that gets some community input on that as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And no, we didn't get that ready for tonight, but you're right. Come September, October, I think we'll be heading full steam ahead on that kind of a process. So we'll be discussing that over what's left of the summer, I guess, to figure out what the path forward is for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? We've got a motion on the floor and it's been moved and seconded. So unless there's anything else, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? And it's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. That's all for the agenda that we have for tonight, and I guess we'll be having some discussions, I guess, after the next council meeting as to how we might move forward in terms of getting input and figuring out what that long-term vision is going to look like in a little bit more detail. But for now, is there anybody else that wants any new business to bring up? Seeing, oh. Yeah, okay, Darla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention we are moving forward with phase 2 of the reopening, and we're working with facilities and public health and all the regulations required to open up the library for some public access. We're going to extend the hours for curbside. As Ray mentioned, it's doing extremely well. And we're going to expand that to include Saturdays and open up for a portion of the afternoon, 6 days a week for public access. The public will be allowed to book a computer or browse the collection. So just wanted to let you know that. And just to point out, yes, that visioning piece, that is an exercise over time. It's not something we bring to one meeting, I don't think. It's but I think it can be a very exciting time, and there is huge growth in the library world globally. We see even just our neighbors investing heavily in the library system. Caledon's about to open a new community center library. Brampton has a new one. It seems to be what people want from their communities, and of course we love our downtown heritage location with all its history and all its character. But I do believe the team here at the library can deliver services from anywhere at any time on a top-notch level. So.
All right. Gives everybody something to think about in terms over the rest of summer and what that vision is going to look like. So, okay. So unless there's anything else, and I'm not seeing anybody stick a hand up, so I think we're done. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Patrick, seconded by Ben. All those in favor? And I think that's it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.